Excitement time. I've always wanted to put a Latin title on a PowerPoint. Roughly translated is "in information we trust." And the point about this is that probably 5 to 10% of the content of an enterprise file is PowerPoint. PowerPoint is crucially important in an organization. Yesterday, we were talking about books and how titles are important. Every PowerPoint presentation, they like to have a clever title. You know, Towards the New Horizon is actually the new building in Japan. Yeah. So if you're searching by title, you have no idea what the relevance of the item is from the title. Moreover, it's full of graphics, often JPEGs inserted in, so you can't look at the Excel spreadsheet because it's there as an image. So PowerPoint is just one example of enterprise content you don't have to struggle with in any other domain. So that's really what I'm going to talk about. And the search network highlighted on the screen is a bunch of about 12 of us around the world who are 1 to 2 to 3 person bands of independent consultants. We're not linked to any vendor. Everything we do is neutral. Michael Upshaw, hiding at the back, is a member. Helen Lepal, who is in the audience virtually, is a member. And we meet monthly and share all sorts of insights about technology and customers. So I want to talk a bit about information disasters, first of all. Then a little bit about what we mean by search. Why is enterprise search different? And then I want to look at the amount of research that's been done on enterprise search. Talk a bit about what life is like inside the enterprise. That's really the important bit, because you need to understand how people work inside the enterprise in order to deliver search satisfaction. And then a bit about search satisfaction or the lack of it. And finally, what are we going to do to improve the situation in terms of content? So, 1999, the Mars Climate Orbiter. It was going to land on Mars. And the documentation for the instrumentation ran to about 15,000 pages. And then there was the propulsion system and all the ways of making sure it landed carefully on the moon. And that was about 10,000 pages done by 2 different organizations. And they put them together. And when it got to Mars, it crashed into the surface. But surely the documentation had been checked and checked again. Yeah, but trouble is that this chunk of text, the functionality was written in metric units. But the propulsion engineers were working in imperial units. So when it said meters, they were thinking of feet. So when they thought it was going to gradually touch down on Mars, it was still traveling at 500 miles an hour. Now, both of those documents were high quality content, but when you put them together, they were literally a disaster. How many of you walked across the wobbly bridge in the millennium? Yeah, this is when, as you walked, the bridge walked with you. And it went out of action because O'Varrick, who designed it, said, well, I'm sorry, but we've never used this type of suspension before. No one's ever done it before. Sorry, we made a mistake. £5 million later and a rebuild. Except that actually it had been done before. And in 1993, some engineers in Japan were worried about what happened when people walked out of a city in an earthquake situation. So they built bridges specifically to test various different types of suspension. And what they found was that the suspension that was used for the Millennium Bridge was fundamentally flawed, because if the whole population of Tokyo walked out, the bridge may collapse. And this was sitting in the office of the designers, but in Japan, and no one noticed it. And then the Fukushima disaster. This was when in 2011, a tsunami hit the Japanese coast and really had a terrible impact on the nuclear power plant, but it grew into a huge disaster. And what is very interesting is a piece of research done by some of my colleagues at the University of Sheffield looked into the issues around documentation. And what you can't read very clearly is the lining in red. And what it says here is information which did not conform to pre-existing attitudes towards nuclear power was either avoided, ignored, or distorted. So all the issues about the nuclear risk issues of a tsunami basically was just hidden away because no one wanted to acknowledge that it could be a major nuclear disaster. So here's an essence situation where little decisions on information had enormous impacts on the world, literally. The problem is, when we talk about search, there are lots of different types of search. Everyone says AI is going to transform search, but which search? You've got web search, all the websites around the world. And the thing about web content is it's curated. Search engine optimization, we're really going to work on it. It's going to be great. Then you've got website internet search. Again, someone owns the content. It's lovely. It's beautiful. It's got information architecture. It's fantastic. Library search, like the big databases of Elsevier and others. You've got e-commerce search, huge business. All of you use Amazon e-commerce search, and you know just how good the search application is on it. Oh, maybe not. And then you've got all the, what I call systematic searches, the professional searches like LexisNexis, PubMed, and others like that. And the key thing is, all of that stuff is curated within an inch of its life. And when you come to enterprise search, no one cares about curation. There's no reward for making content findable. The only reward you get is someone you don't know phones you up and says, I've just read your report. Can you tell me what it means? And I'll come on to a little bit later showing you why content is curated in lots of different ways. So everything you know about search, when it comes to enterprise search, is probably not well founded in reality. Here are some of the, I'll economize a little bit. Here are just some of the instances of why enterprise search is different. You've got huge files, 500 million files. One pharma client of mine had 1 billion files of information. On one particular drug, they had over 9 million documents. So if you just search for that particular drug, you get 900 million items back. That's a challenge. One of the things I do want to touch on, number 9, is the concept of an additive search. Now, what's an additive search? The point is, in the enterprise, people already have a significant amount of information. They're getting it from email, they're getting it from other applications, they're getting it from social media. They've got a huge amount of information. What they want to find is something new, something that may just have been published, something related but slightly different. They are not starting from base 0. This is important when you come to thinking about precision, because if they do a search, the top 3 or 4 results pages may be very relevant but useless. Relevance and usefulness are not synonyms, because those top 4 pages, they've already got that information. So trying to get, we're going to give you the precise, high precision content on the first page. I couldn't care less as an enterprise employee because I've already got it. I'm looking at more towards recall to make sure the stuff I've missed. Above all, failure to find is not an option because your career and your organization is at risk. That doesn't happen in any other aspect of search. If you can't find a document, or you find a document and you assume it's been properly curated, it could backfire on you. Martin, where did you get that document from? That's rubbish. That was done by Fred 10 years ago. It's total rubbish. And of course, the impact on the organization, which we see with the Mars lander, with the wobbly bridge, can have a direct impact on the organization, and a very embarrassing impact. And if you want to see the power of information when you discover it, the current issue with Nigel Farage, because he put a subject request into Coots, say, excuse me, what are you talking to me about? Oh dear, we didn't curate that very well, did we? So we've all been talking about research over this conference, research into metadata, knowledge organization. Let's have a look at enterprise search research. Must be a lot of it around. Well, it's been going a long time. First bibliography on enterprise search, on information retrieval, covered the era from 1957 to 1961. It's quite old, almost as old as me. And then the first document that relates the use of computers to searching information is this thesis by Philip Bagley, who many of you probably have never heard of. That was 1951. So this is the start of enterprise search, 1951. And then in 1968, he invented metadata. So this man created the concept of searching basically strings of characters using computers, and then decided to put some structure around it in 1968. Most people have not heard of Philip Bagley, and his 1968 thesis is well worth reading. And this is the first example of an enterprise search. This is the LEADER project in the United States, and this was carried out in 1969. This was searching internal documentation. So we've been doing search since 1969. And as I will show you later on, it is rubbish the way it is now implemented. Total dissatisfaction. So we've not learnt much since 1969. And this is why. There are around about 100,000 research papers on information retrieval. I know there are 62,000 in what's called the IR anthology, but that misses out most of the key journals. It misses out preprints. It misses out a hell of a lot. I reckon it's about 100,000. There is only one research paper that looks at enterprise search inside a specific business. Only one. That's done by the team, I can't pronounce the name, Tanya.
Marianne Lykke, Anne Bygholm, Louise Bak Søndergaard, and Katrina Bystrøm.
See, I have voice output on my slides. It's brilliant. But this is very important, and I'll come back to that research. So there's only one paper, and yet 100,000 on information retrieval, largely focused on the web. Now, why have I put up a little bit about me? I've done about 40 enterprise search projects, and I can't tell you where. And I've been at conferences, and I've written, there are 4 books on enterprise search. I've written 3 of them. I must be mad. The Search Network, we exchange ideas, and I've been giving lectures like this at City University in Sheffield since 2002. The reason I put that up is it provides you with the authority to know that what I'm going to tell you might be based on reality. And this our concept of authority, and I remember David Ersweiler was talking about it the other day. We are trying to find authority to say that's good information. So let's go inside the enterprise. Now, the first thing to be said, we're not talking about small specialized operations. Somewhere around about 600 million people use enterprise search. 600 million. And the people who have that capability have a direct impact on the GDP of the countries they're located in. So if you can make search work better, you could improve the economic situation of the country. So you'd have thought that someone would bother to improve enterprise search, wouldn't you? But no, no one has. So let's go inside the enterprise. Now, there has been some work done on tasks. A lot of work's been done on tasks to see how people undertake a particular task, looking at an HR database or looking at a legal database. The problem is, in business, you make decisions, you don't do tasks. Someone has to make a decision on whether to buy a company, whether to launch a new product, whether to open an office in Japan. And this is some work done by Charles Citroen, who I knew well, a Dutchman, who, having already got a PhD in chemistry, decided to have a PhD in information science. That's a double whammy. And he went to talk to the senior executives in banks and in pharma companies. And he said, how do you know where the information you have on your pad of paper when you go into a board meeting, how do you know where the information comes from? And the answer was, well, I asked my secretary to get it. They have no idea where the information came from. They trust that their employees have done a good job, but they don't actually know. And the problem is a failure on any one of these inputs will prejudice the decision. So even if you've got an individual task sorted, it's the combination of tasks that makes enterprise search so difficult and why there is so much dissatisfaction, because the slightest problem is amplified as that decision goes through. Because people assume, oh, well, that's great. On that basis, we could do this. If that information is incorrect, or they can't find that information and make an assumption, problems. There's some very interesting work being done on how professional users, patent agents, lawyers, recruitment people, and others use the functionality. And briefly, these are the functions on a classic filter on an enterprise search. I don't want to go into them in any detail, except this is law and this is healthcare, and you'll notice the pattern is completely different. In law, no one uses acronyms. In healthcare, acronyms are very important indeed. You know, you're talking about CT scans. You don't write computerized tomography scans. But in law, abbreviations are vague, and so no one uses it. And the point here is that we know a lot about how individual types of users use search. We don't see it added together in what's going to go on inside a particular organization. Let's talk about information quality. There are probably no more than a dozen research papers on information quality in the enterprise, and that's pushing it a little bit. This particular one by Sven Laumann was published in 2017. I'm not going to take you through in detail because basically he's the first person to provide some quality metrics and some quality definitions in an enterprise context. There was a brilliant book by Luciana Floridi called The Philosophy of Information Quality. It's a very good read, but it's not really a handbook. It raises a lot of issues and doesn't necessarily solve them, but it's an essential read. The point about Sven Laumann is that when you look at the citations on this paper, I think there are 27. In other words, since he wrote this in 2017, there are only 27 other citations of this piece of work. So no one's doing much work on information quality. This is a fundamental paper. There's another one here which looks at governance and risk and the quality of the documentation around it. And again, this one, I've given references of all these, came out in 2019. There's a huge number of problems with the quality of the documentation about risk inside companies. Risk can bury a company. So how do people make decisions? Do they trust the information they get? This was some research carried out by the Aberdeen Group in September 2019. And basically it's about, do you trust the information you get inside your company? And down here, on sort of a median, 65% of people said basically the accuracy is rubbish. Right? 31% said the information is incomplete. So they go ahead and make decisions without having access to high quality information. And has it improved since 2017? I very much doubt it, but I haven't got any conclusive proof except for one paper that's coming up shortly. In the enterprise, there are multiple repositories. It's not a question of, oh, it goes into one huge file. This comes from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory at NASA. You'd think Jet Propulsion Laboratory would have things under control. Well, they pretty much do, but these are all the places that they store their information. So how do you know which store it's in? Because each of those has its own search application. And if you say, well, yes, we can just put all that into one search application and do a federated search. No, you can't, because the relevance of that document in each of those repositories may be different. And you can't just say, oh, we're doing average relevance. because those documents are different sizes, they have different types of information. So you have a real problem here. You're faced with multiple search applications, and people get used to a particular search application for a particular type of document. They may use the DocuShare, which is a document management system, and they have absolutely no idea how to use Druva. Now, I was talking about curation, and this comes from the same brilliant piece of case research. This is who people write for. And 28% of the survey that they did write for members of their team. This is just their local team, and they write in shorthand. They assume their team will know the context. So they don't say, you may remember last year we had that problem with. They'll just assume that people know they had that problem, and then they're going to move on. And so there's no curation going on. Why bother? Because the team knows the context. It knows the jargon. And usually it's probably speaking with one language, and we'll come on to the language in a minute. So the problem here is that management, they're writing 13%, and sometimes they're just writing for themselves. Oh, bless them, they've got nothing better to do. I'll write myself a report. But the point is here, you're dealing with a highly fragmented information environment. Now, this comes back to the work that was being done by Marianne Leake and her friends. Because when you do an analysis of search logs, you find out something quite remarkable. 63% of the searches done in what was this, in a day, are for people. You're thinking, these people are so sad. They're having to find an expert to help them. No, they're not looking for experts. They're looking for authority. They've got a document, it's by Martin White. Which Martin White is that? They want to click on a name and they want to find that person. Not necessarily to contact them, but the reassurance, oh yes, he's in that project team. Okay, that'd be good. And all the time in enterprise search, you are double checking for the authority, for the quality of the content. That is why all the other areas are an order of magnitude less than search for people. And let me tell you, searching for people is an absolute nightmare, because we all spell names differently. A classic in Scandinavia is Christian spelled with a K, or is it spelled with a C? And if you haven't got the right software and you put Christian with a C, it won't find Christian with a K. For example, Microsoft Search, but we won't go there. And there is no, these are very low categories. And then there is a huge long tail. And I have been, one of my pharma clients, I got to rank 5,000 and I was still getting 30 searches a week on rank 5,000. And that, when you get down to it, they were a group of people on a particular project that needed to have absolutely all the information on that subject. So you can't say, oh, we're improving the precision. You've got to improve the precision for the guy at rank 5,000 who's got a very specific question that he wants answered. And then you've got a concept that no one talks about, content granularity. This comes from the Inter-American Development Bank, and you've got annual reports, books, catalogs, code publications, databases, discussion papers, learning materials. Each of those has a different metadata structure, a different usage. Some of it's signed off at a high level, some of it's not. Oh, and by the way, it's in 3 languages. It's in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. Machine translation isn't good enough because you're talking about lending Argentina billions of dollars. I'm not going to rely on a machine translation. I'm going to pay someone to make sure I've got that correctly translated for our colleagues in Argentina. But this granularity, again, you can't make assumptions about, oh, it's good for everyone. And then you come to the Babel dimension. This comes from a large pharma company, and it's based in Germany. And 73% of the content is in English. but only 24% of the employees speak English as their first language. So they are searching in their second language or maybe third, and that is a real challenge. There's some work being done by Harvey Morgan, who's a colleague of mine at Sheffield, looking at second language issues on search. And you find that search performance goes like that, because you don't have the right synonyms, you're not sure how to ask the questions, you may not be able to read the text when it comes back at you because it's a high-level version of the tongue. And what's Polish doing there? Well, Polish is there because their accounts department is in Poland. And everything they do in Poland is in Polish. And if you want to find the internal documentation of the finance department, you've got to better search Polish, because everything in Poland is in Polish. Why should they write in any other language? That's where they deal the numbers. Now, all of these are recognized languages of this organization. But in fact, 26 different languages are needed to cover all their content. And where that's very evident, particularly in the pharma industry, in what's called pharmacovigilance, this is adverse reactions to drugs. And this is, because I'm fond of Denmark, this is the Denmark contraindication list for what we call Panadol, and they call Panodil. That will defeat any natural language processor to recognize that from there, because it's not natural language. Sorry, folks, it's an artificial language created by the marketing department. And the point about this is it has to be in Danish because it's subject to Danish law. Because the law relating to pharmaceuticals is written in Denmark, in Danish, for agreement by the Danish Parliament and Danish judges. You cannot get away from saying, "I just we got Swedish, we'll give them the Swedish version." The Swedish law may be different. So you're getting to the stage you absolutely have to be able to search in Danish for what it says about a particular drug. And then let's come to snippets. We were talking yesterday, I think again it was David Erskine, talking about the importance of snippets. Oh, snippets. There's a PhD thesis by David Maxwell, which you simply have to read because it's the best PhD thesis you will ever read in terms of its presentation and in its clarity. And David, who was at the University of ISKO, looked at this concept that he developed with Leif Azzopardi and some others on basically the complex searcher model. Now, it's not specifically about enterprise search, but it mirrors, in my experience, what goes on. Because basically, people do a search, they look at the search results page, and then they say, I'm not getting anywhere. Let's go back and try a different query. And this goes on. So they're scanning a list of snippets. Scan. This morning, I think Deborah was talking about, came from UCL. Back in 2012, I was working on a search implementation for University College London. And we'd done a lot of work on the technology. And we showed to a working party, we showed the snippets pages and something else. And she said, I'm not going to let that go. You can't use that in UCL. Why? Because 1 in 8 people suffers from dyslexia. Suffers is the wrong word. 1 in 8 people has a dyslexic condition, which means they cannot easily recognize words. It's a spectrum. So some people have no idea what they're looking at, and others only have to struggle with particular things. And one of the issues here is that this, even though it's Google Scholar, is not easy to read if you're dyslexic, because the colors change, you've got bold text, all of this makes it very difficult. And yet you've got 1 in 8 people who may not be able to use a snippet and therefore may not be able to quickly scan through. There is enormous pressure on, we've got to reduce the time taken to search. Let's get it down to 3 seconds. That's not the point. It's not how quickly you get the results back, it's how long it takes someone to scan through the results and maybe look at the documents. And so the design of snippets pages is critically important when you have to cope with people who've got dyslexia or some other cognitive neurovariant conditions. There has been no research done on the effectiveness of snippets in enterprise search, even though it's fundamental in the process of search. Why hasn't the information research community, retrieval community, decided to look at snippets? There's a lot of work done. Mark Sanderson in Cicero, in Australia, and others, Royal University of Melbourne. But no one's done it for an enterprise environment. And yet the challenges are, and particularly when this is in multiple languages, because you've done a search which is looking at multiple language search, and so the snippets are in different languages. That's quite common. And I was worried when I wrote this about where's the actual evidence, because this is me anecdotally looking at all this. And then I come along last week with a paper, the impact of misspellings. Because misspellings turn out to be a major problem in search. You're all probably aware of the disease called diphtheria. But it's not diphtheria, it's diphtheria. It's not P, it's PH, D-I-P-H. Often people take the H out. It's the Greek word for leather, which is what happens to the throat and the tongue. But when they looked at it, there were so many occasions when even medical people had spelt diphtheria without the fourth letter being an H, and the search engine says, don't recognize it. Because this is specialized language, and NLP doesn't quite cope with misspellings. Because this is a slightly artificial language. I used to work for a company called Reed Telepublishing. Thank you. Reed Telepublishing, and the name was coined by a very mischievous chairman who chose telepublishing because it was a mixture of Greek and Latin, and it just appealed to him in terms of language. So, are users satisfied with the internal search functionality? This is a survey in Scandinavia. 10% are very dissatisfied, 30% are dissatisfied. So in total, 40% of people are dissatisfied with the performance of their search. And you may say, where does search satisfaction sit as a metric? Where is precision, recall, all that? Satisfaction is extremely important. In 2003, DeLorme and McLean wrote a benchmark paper on information system satisfaction. And that is what lies behind this. You've got to pick out bits and pieces to work out why that search satisfaction is so low. And this is not a new phenomenon. We started it in 2014, knowing that enterprise search was rubbish. And there's been no improvement since then. So, coming towards the end, let me give you some of the challenges that we face. This is a recent letter in Nature, and it's not quite readable. The search for solutions to mitigate the threats from AI-generated content creates significant research challenges. A silver bullet approach is unlikely to exist. Multiple research directions have to be explored to solve it. Because remember, it comes back to authority. It's nice getting a summarization from ChatGPT. Do you want to stand up in court and say, someone under my care in the clinical environment, we made a mistake because we used a summarized GPT. We hadn't realized it wasn't actually written by a qualified doctor. I'm not sure I'd want to stand up in court and say that. And this came from the Ministry of Defense. Again, future efforts should focus on developing models that understand the context of the information they're processing, not just predicting what the next word is likely to be. There's a huge amount of research to be done in terms of using large language models in an enterprise with multiple content that's not created in multiple languages by people who have multiple tasks. So to finish up, this is a brilliant piece of work by Paul Cleverley and Simon Burnett up at Robert Gordon University. Back in 2014, 17, I think it was, 2019. They identified three sources of where search dissatisfaction, what the reasons for it. And they saw technology, content, and training. And you have to address all three. Because at the present moment, full AI ML magic applied to your content. We're selling search on the basis it's magic. All right. Would you be willing to go to your boss and say, hey, boss, it's magic, we should buy it? You ain't going to get any money. This bunch don't know that. They're going to go bankrupt. Content. I'll take you back to the Aberdeen group. There is still a big concern about the authority of the content that you're seeing. The work by Charles Citroen said, even at a top level, people don't know where their information came from or whether to trust it. And training, this is a very good paper on using work system theory to explain enterprise search dissatisfaction. The problem is you have to train all your employees how to use search. And yet, very few companies train people how to do search, because search is intuitive, isn't it? You know, it's just like Google. No, it's not. It's very complicated. And people need to understand how search works in order to understand why they may be getting very good results or very bad results. So you have to look at this whole system, and training costs money. Content curation is a huge policy issue. And as for AI, well, let's finish off. There's no published research on enterprise search. So how does the enterprise search software business know what the enterprise wants? It doesn't know how people work in the enterprise. It has to guess. Because when you look at all the senior staff of all these startup companies, they've never worked inside an enterprise. And the other challenge is 95% of all the enterprise search is Microsoft SharePoint. So how are you going to replace Microsoft SharePoint, which is effectively free, with an AI ML solution, which is going to cost money? No CTO or CEO is going to say, don't worry about that. Just go and buy that new thing. But remember, it has to search all the systems in our house, not just Microsoft. And Microsoft Search is not an enterprise search application. When it comes to content, how do you validate it? And with training, it costs money and time to support the training. So the critical issues are, can you trust it? And can you find it? In that order, can you find it? Can you trust it? What I'm saying here is there's a huge opportunity to delve into how we search in the enterprise, but no one is doing the research. Sad. And it could have a huge impact on the economic life of the world. End of story. And that's a typical search manager. He's been reduced to stone.